Hey everybody, welcome back to Jim's Garage. In this video, I'm going to be walking you through my NAS migration. I'm taking it off my old hardware and onto the HL15, which I've showcased before. We'll have a quick look at Houston OS, which is plugged as a kind of TrueNAS alternative, but I'll then be migrating over to TrueNAS in a virtual machine on Proxmox. Now I know, as my poll suggested, most of you, and myself included, were in the bare metal TrueNAS camp. But I figured that this device has 256 gigs of RAM and 10 cores, and that seems to be a bit of a waste for just having TrueNAS on there. So whilst you can run VMs and things and Docker containers on TrueNAS, I wanted to keep TrueNAS as TrueNAS, but also have the ability to put virtual machines outside of that, CT containers, etc. on Proxmox like I'm used to. So I'll show all of that, including the actual hardware pass-through as well, and hopefully by the end of this video we're seeing my new NAS migrated successfully across onto this new hardware. Let's get straight into it. So as a reminder from my previous video, here is the HL15. You can see the 15 drive bays at the front, and I've still got a few peripherals in there from the last video I did where I was talking about maybe making this an all-in-one. You can see it's got a discrete GPU, also another HBA, plus a NIC in there with the 4 ports. Now I'm probably going to take all of those out for this video, just because I want to keep this simple and get TrueNAS up and running first. In the future, I'll probably add in a GPU, possibly spin up some VMs. That will give me the opportunity to do things like Plex or Jellyfin transcoding, because as I said, I've still got 256 gigs and a number of cores to play with here. So for those who've never seen Houston OS, this is the web user interface, much like you have with many applications. There is also a desktop environment because this is basically built upon Rocky Linux. But if we log in here, you should see the first dashboard for the system. Now, there are some things to call off the bat. This isn't as advanced as some other solutions out there, but what it does at its core, I think, is pretty good. Now, I have had a few issues with this, and that goes without saying. So things like this service always keeps failing. But outside of this dynamic system tuning daemon, everything seems to have worked fine. And so this could be a good alternative for you if you don't want to be running TrueNAS or doing something else, say running ZFS elsewhere. And this thing is basically OpenZFS on a Rocky Linux installation. So tried and tested, lots of good software being used here, lots of open source goodness as well. Now this will pretty much do all of the features you would normally expect. So we can go into the networking, we can drill down, we can add all of the interfaces that I've added here. We also get fine control over adding bonds, teams, bridges and VLANs, and you can also jump into the OS itself, so plug a monitor in or just go through IPMI, etc. if you want to control it through the desktop environment. We can have a look at the storage devices, which are pretty cool as well, and also it gets onto some graphics as well, which is great. We'll see that in a minute. Virtual machines is also possible on this, and you need to install the libvirt package. So if you try to create a VM, it will say virt install. So that is possible. I haven't actually gone through and done that, just because I'm going to be using Proxmox anyway, or I could use TrueNAS instead. You can define the user accounts for this system as well, so you can add new user accounts and then you can break down permissions, roles, etc. within here. There's a number of services as well that you can find on here, and you can manually enable or disable, or you can add them as well. The 45 drives ZFS, so this is how you would actually create your pools. So you can go through here and create a storage pool. So I'll just call this one test, for example. We can select the devices, so I've just stuck in here a couple of SSDs. We can choose the RAID layout, so for this one I'd probably just do a mirror. We can obviously add more devices, more VDEVs, etc. We can do some pool settings, so how we actually want it set up, so what sector size we want, what record size we want, whether we want compression, and some advanced features like deduplication. I'd probably put that on. And then we go next. We can give it a different file system if we wanted to. So this sense, we're going to create a file system, but if you have one already existing, you can say a different parent. I'm not going to do encryption just for this demonstration, but obviously you could encrypt it and put a password in if you want. You can also choose the cipher for whatever encryption standards you're mandated to use. You can also make this read-only if you want, and you can also set a quota, which is quite nice. Then after the summary, we basically click finish. That'll go away now and create the pool, wait for it to be ready, and then we can actually set up some data sets off the back of that. One thing I really like about this Houston OS is the visualizations. So here, for example, you can see that I've got those 2 drives populated, those 2 bays. Here you can see some details about the drive itself. I think that's just quite a nice visualization that I'm not used to in TrueNAS. yeah, sure, you don't actually need it, but it is quite nice. Similarly, over to the motherboard as well, it will give you a pictorial overview of the motherboard, i.e. what you've got in the slots, where they're located, etc. It'll also give you some cool statistics around, say, CPU, 42 degrees, for example. You can see in here, I've got a times 16. This is actually just a GPU. In this one, I've got a NIC, I believe. Actually, it's that one. I can't remember what I've got in there, some other device. But anyway, it gives you some idea of what's in there, things like the RAM as well, which is pretty handy. I don't think anything on the back works, but that's quite nice to see what's going on. There's a handy built-in navigator as well, so you can actually browse the file system through the browser as well, which is pretty handy, definitely for changing configuration files as well, and you can even get access into your data through this. Setting up shares is pretty straightforward. It supports SMB, NFS, and iSCSI, and you would just configure this like you would for any sort of sharing service. Identities as well is tied in, so you can see what users and groups you've got on there, so you can assign different users to different groups, set up those file share permissions, but also access to this Houston OS as well. What's quite cool is a few tools that are built in, so you can do FIO benchmarks on your drives to measure throughput. There's some applications, and you can add more applications to this, so for machines and storage. You can create reports for diagnostics, so things like scrubs and the health of drives, etc. There's also access into the terminal as well if you didn't want to SSH into this device. Anyway, that's a quick look at Houston OS. I think it's positive. I'm not going to use it. I think there's still some more work to do, and I've got a few problems, things like that, services that I've looked online, and again, I think a few other people also have these issues. So not poo-pooing Houston OS, I'm just used to TrueNAS and I'm going to be using TrueNAS. So let's move over to that part of the video. We're going to get the prerequisites done first, and then we're going to move over to actually putting my disks in, then importing that configuration file and getting it all up and running. So here on my current TrueNAS setup, there's a few prerequisites we want to do first. We want to basically back up the configuration of this machine first, and we also want to update it. So I've already done that earlier. So I made sure that I was on 2504.2.4, which is the current stable version. And that's important because the backup file that you download for your existing setup needs to match the version that you're actually going to move to that fresh machine. So I'm going to be installing the 2504.2.4 as a virtual machine, and then I can import this config file from here. To invoke a backup manually, you can go to System and then General Settings, and then here, and we can click Download the file. You can choose whether you want to encrypt it or not, and then just hit Save. You'll also get prompted if you go to this update and there is an update available and you perform the update, you'll be asked to back up the configuration file at that time. So now I'm going to head over to the TrueNAS website. I'm going to download the latest stable version of the Community Edition. So over on the TrueNAS website, we just want to hit that we don't want to sign up, and then we just download this one here. This will pull down the ISO file that we need. I'm also downloading the Proxmox version 9 for this one. So this is what I'm going to be burning to a USB stick. We're going to install this on the new machine. Anyway, now I'm going to make sure that nothing is using my NAS, so I'm going to go into my existing Proxmox setup, any physical machines, I'm going to dismount the NAS or turn those virtual machines off, those services, to make sure that nothing's writing to the disk, because if I turn off the NAS whilst something's being written, it could end in data corruption. So make sure before you power off your NAS, everything is turned off that's using it, and then power it down, because I'm going to be transferring the disks from one machine to the other. So here's my existing NAS. It's a little worse for wear. You can see all the drives here at the front in a not too easily accessible caddy holder. You can see that I've got 4 fans at the front, 4 in the middle and 2 at the back. Now I'm actually looking forward to getting rid of those because they're only 80mm fans. The new ones in this HL15 are a 120, so they run quieter and push more air. So let's move the disks. Thankfully that was a pretty straightforward process, and here is the last one that's going in. This was dead easy. There's no rails or anything to put it in. They just slot in and everything was straightforward. Now with everything installed, and thanks to it having IPMI, I can actually just log in now remotely into the machine, and we can actually set this up and install it straight from our web browser, which is pretty awesome and one of the benefits of having sort of a workstation server board. Obviously, if I was doing this pro or in a more enterprise setup, I'd probably be booting this from the network, but a simple USB device is going to suffice for a home installation. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to get the machine booted up. So if you top right, we can do a power on, so I can click that. That's now going to power on in the background. With that powered on, I'm going to go to the remote control and I'm going to launch the remote console. And now we should get the desktop output. So I'm obviously going to want to hit the delete button here. So I'm just going to put the virtual keyboard on so you can see that. I'm going to spam delete until we get into the BIOS. Now that we're in the BIOS, I'm just going to go and check that it's recognized all of the hard drives in here, everything that's attached. And I'm then going to change the boot option to boot from the USB device I've got plugged in. So with all of that checked, I'm going to go down to the boot override function and I'm going to choose the UEFI USB stick that I inserted, which should be this one here, I believe. So hitting that one, we should see the Proxmox installer. Yep, perfect. So I'm just going to go through this Proxmox installation. It'll be exactly like you've seen me do many times on my videos. So go and check out my video if you want to see that, but there's not really much to see here. You can't really go wrong. As long as you understand where you're installing this thing, what kind of installation you want. I've got to make sure that I don't install this onto one of the hard drives as part of my RAIDs pool. But that should be pretty easy because I'm installing this to an NVMe drive and that will look significantly different to a hard disk drive. So now that Proxmox is installed and booting up for the first time, we're going to connect to it in the browser any moment. So this has just picked up an IP address through DHCP, which I'm going to change. But anyway, let's head over to this 6.224 address so we can see the proper user interface. So now heading over to that site, we need to log in for the first time, and logging in, we're presented with the dashboard. So the first thing I'm going to do obviously is go down and pull down any updates, and after that we'll have a look and see if it's found all of the disks that we expect. Now that everything's updated, let's have a quick look and see what we can find on this machine. So the disk bit is obviously one of the most important things, and I've already had a look through off screen, but every single drive is there that I expect, which is a good sign and puts my mind at ease. Next, we're going to create the actual virtual machine for my TrueNAS installation. But there's a couple of prerequisites, and if you've seen any of my videos before on pass-through, it's always recommended that you disable the hardware from the host that you're going to pass through. So typically that will involve blacklisting the device IDs and also disabling the drivers from even loading in the first place. That should ensure that there is complete segregation between the peripheral you want to pass through, the host and the VM, and obviously for a TrueNAS it expects to have full control over the drives. So the HBAs I'm going to pass through, only TrueNAS has access to them, which will give it raw access to the drives itself so that the software RAID will work. Having a quick look at the IOMMU groups, I think, and part of this is me testing, I think we need these two here, which are the SATA controllers, because I believe 8 of the drives go through the motherboard, and then we also need this SAS expansion here, this card. So it should be these 3 devices that I need to pass through to the virtual machine. Time will tell. So I'm going to blacklist these devices following the official documentation in Proxmox, and I'm then going to install TrueNAS. Moving over to the TrueNAS installation, I've only got a single drive on here. Everything's going to be on this single drive. I might add in a NVMe expansion card into this. We'll see in the future. So I'm going to click on the ISO images and I'm going to upload the TrueNAS that we downloaded earlier. So now with TrueNAS uploading, we should have everything we need to create the virtual machine, assign the right amount of CPU and memory, add through those 2 devices and boot for the first time. Fingers crossed, we should see all of the drives that we expect and we should be able to import my configuration from the old one without any issue. So going through and creating this virtual machine, I'm going to call this one TrueNAS. I'm going to make sure that the advanced is on. I probably want to start this one at boot. I'm going to click next. The ISO image is going to be TrueNAS scale. The type is going to be Linux because it's now running on Debian. Hit next. I'm probably going to change this to be a Q35 machine because that's what's recommended for PCIe pass-through. I'm going to put the EFI storage and I won't pre-enroll the keys. We are going to need a single drive, so I'm going to use virtscsi to actually install TrueNAS 2. Now for TrueNAS itself, I'm going to leave the default of 32 gigs. I can always expand this in the future if I need to. Going to put discard and SSD emulation on so it can reclaim space and it will basically perform like it's an SSD. Going to click next, and for the CPU I've only got one socket in this machine. I'll make sure I change it to host so it can use all of the capabilities of this enterprise CPU. I'm going to change the cores to probably something like, I'll try 4. It used to have 4 and it was on a much slower CPU. And for memory, I'm going to give it 32 gigabytes, which is what it had previously, and I'll see how I feel on that. I can obviously give it more. I've got 256 gigs in here to play with, but I would like to use that memory for other stuff. I am going to make this static, so all of that RAM will be given to it. I don't want to balloon it on the NAS just in case. Now for the network, I'm just going to leave this on VMBR0 for now. I'll probably change this up in the future, but I just want to get this thing up and running. It is by default on the switch already tagged with VLAN 6, which is where I have my NASs, and all of the access is tightly controlled. So hitting next, we should be able to just have a quick review through here. Everything looks to be right, so I'm going to click finish. Now we should see that being created, and the important thing really is we want to go to the hardware tab. And I'm going to add some PCI devices. So on here, I'm going to put a raw device, and I'm going to choose first the SAS controller, and then I'll do the two SATA controllers. Now changing the boot order to boot from the media we've got installed, and having the 2 bits of hardware, which I think the disks are attached to, I'm going to attempt to start this up, begin the installation process, and hopefully we see all of our drives. So let's begin the installation, and I'll see you on the other side. Now during the installation, this does look promising. I need to make sure obviously that I install it only on the one drive that I want it to be on, so don't overwrite any of my drives. That seems to have completed, so we'll remove the installation media as it's requesting, and fingers crossed we should be able to reboot this device and we're good to go. Now that that's shut down, that hardware should be removed when we start this up, and it should now boot automatically into the TrueNAS installation we just set up. So the boot order now should be the SCSI 0, which is what we expect. And if we go to the console, yeah, hopefully we're booting straight into TrueNAS scale. And from this, we should be able to now see the IP address to actually go in and connect to this machine. Good news is I can hear all of the drives spinning up, and we can see here that it's attaching all the disks. And then we should be able to import my existing configuration file and adopt effectively this virtual machine to my old TrueNAS installation. Now that that's all completed, hopefully we can access 6.199. Let's try that now in the browser. So heading over to the IP address, yes, we get it. Logging in for the first time, hopefully we're going to see the dashboard. Yeah, perfect, we do. Everything looks to be working. So before I go any further, I'm going to go to the system, I'm going to go to that general settings, manage configuration file, and I'm going to upload my old one from the previous system. So clicking upload on that file, that should upload it and apply the configuration. It should then go through a reboot, and fingers crossed we should get even things like the same IP address. All my pools should be up and running, and I should be able to access this as though nothing happened. Famous last words, I'll see you in a minute. Part of what makes this great now is the fact that I can see this in a virtual machine. So I can see the console because it's running in Proxmox. Normally when I had to reboot on a bare metal, I'd have to wait for the IPMI, go into there, etc. But having it in here does have some advantages when trying to administer it and check out what's actually going on. So we can see that this is nearly finished. When it has finished, I'm hopeful that we should be able to load up this web page. Now, surprises do happen, and I should have thought about this earlier. But actually the network interface from my previous configuration file, that doesn't exist on here because it's going to have a different name. So what we need to do here is we need to go back into the command line, and again, because this is in a console in a VM, this makes it quite easy. So we want to configure the network interfaces. So if I delete this network, that's going to get deleted. I'm going to press A to apply those, P to persist. So now that the IPv4 address has been saved, we should be able to now log back in, and it will show us the old configuration but on a new IP, and I should be able to quite simply change the static IP through the TrueNAS user interface. And hopefully I can log in with my old credentials, which did work. And here I can see my 2 pools that are up and running. So it should be a case now of going over to the network and editing this network setup to put in the IP address that I had previously. You'll need to hit then add, and I'll put in the IP address here, so 192.6.2, and that's on a /24 network. So I'm going to hit save. So now that looks like it did. I'm going to test those changes. So this page should no longer work, but if I go to 6.2, we're now greeted with the same login page. Perfect, so that is working. So now I'm in the new one, and you can actually quite smartly just click Save Changes, and those are all now saved. So now let's check that the shares are actually working, and something like this computer that I'm recording on, it should never have known that it disconnected, shouldn't know it's a new machine. And so here, connecting to 6.2, you can see that I've got all my YouTube videos in here. Everything seems to be working. There's no difference. I can hear it spinning up just as I normally would. So perfect, we've now virtualized TrueNAS on this new HL15, and I'm going to be testing this out to see how I like it. Now what it does do, obviously back into Proxmox itself. If I hit the summary now on this machine, you can see that I've got a lot of RAM to play with and a lot of CPU to play with. So I don't know, maybe this could form one of my Proxmox nodes, I'm not sure. What I am sure of is it's going to give me a ton of options to think about in the future. Now after hitting this with some IO, one thing I have noticed is this chassis is significantly cooler than my previous model. I was getting temperatures up towards 50, which is a bit hot for a hard drive, especially when they're densely populated like these are. Here you can see I'm basically capping out at 30C. I'm going to check to make sure that this isn't just some weird anomaly and it's not actually getting some proper reporting, but from everything I can tell it should be accurate because this has got the devices passed through, so it's got full access to the underlying hardware and all of the sensors that are on those drives. I'll report back if this changes, but for now I'm going to be really happy if this is 30 degrees and running as is. I'm also going to check the CPU temps because this is kind of passively cooled with the airflow over the CPU heatsink, and now obviously I'm dumping 15 drives worth of heat into the chassis, so keen to see if that has an impact. So speaking about future options, let me know what you think. What do you recommend? I know a lot of you in the comments and when I put the poll out said definitely run it bare metal, and that's how I've always done it because I want the fewest problems occurring as possible. But I think on this kind of hardware that's designed for sort of these kind of enterprise workloads, having all of that RAM as well, it would be a waste to assign it all to a TrueNAS installation. And yes, I know I could run the VMs and things inside of TrueNAS, but I prefer to do that in Proxmox. Anyway, let me know if you're running a similar setup. Do let me know if you've had any headaches or hit any bumps in the road and how you resolved them. Anyway, I'm going to move on from this video, and in the future I'm probably going to be doing some upgrades. Like I said, I've got a NVMe card that I might want to put in here because I'm really interested in when I'm recording these videos, etc. I actually want to put the capture card from this machine into another machine and record and edit directly on my NAS. I think that would be useful, A, for me to test out, but in terms of productivity as well. I do a lot of benchmarking on this machine that I'm recording on my other channel, and when I'm recording things like games or anything that's testing like GPU, CPU performance, obviously not recording at the same time is going to be beneficial for those performance metrics. Anyway, let me know what you think of this video. If you've liked it, give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe. I'll see you on the next one. Take care, everybody.